What's up, Otaku fam? We are back more reactions here for the channel with some more The Odd Ones Out. Every form of animation.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah, thought that would tickle your animator brain.
I'm excited.
Yeah.
See if I can find the ones that I don't care for.
Most of them. Thank you guys for the continued support, by the way. Be sure to comment, like, subscribe. Every little bit helps. Check out our Patreon link down below for full uncut reactions to TV shows, animes, and movies.
This brick is alive. Not convinced? Well, what if I did this?
I'm gonna do a backflip! That's gonna look so cool, Brickathy!
Brickathy!
What are you boys doing?
He's gonna do a backflip, Grandma!
Are you convinced now? Did the brick feel more alive? I mean, sure, it's still a brick that can't move on its own, but maybe because I put googly eyes on it and gave it a family, you can connect with this brick, and it made you feel emotion. Convincing you that something inanimate is animate is the main goal of the animate-or. They're nothing more than deranged frauds. For the last century, animators have innovated new techniques and styles to this medium, taking it from a spinning wheel that doesn't even use electricity to Spider-Verse. And today, I'm going to talk about all the processes and innovations that have brought the medium of animation to right now. But first, let's go all the way back to the beginning of film, when it was all black and white and people had to put up text whenever they talked. Early on, filmmakers discovered a very simple trick to make anything appear alive in front of a camera. And that simple trick was called stop. If you're filming something and then stop the camera, and then move the thing slightly, capture a new image, move the thing again, and continue to do that a tedious amount of times, on the film, that thing now magically looked like it moved on its own. And with this technique, you could make literally anything appear to be moving. Anything. But some filmmakers took this art form to an extreme level and created whole characters out of clay and a posable metal wire system called an armature. Now, animators can sculpt unique characters that bend and pose in much more believable ways. With stop motion, you don't need to hire a real dinosaur or giant monkey to make a movie about a dinosaur or giant monkey. I'm sorry you didn't get the job, Phil. You know, I just had a crazy idea. What if we made our entire puppet's head interchangeable? Now they can make any facial expression and mouth shape possible. We will have to sculpt out hundreds of different heads though, but I mean, come on, that'll be fun. That's why we're extreme, baby. Stop motion movies are still being made and enjoyed to this day. And while new technology does help make the overall process easier, animators are still using the same techniques that were used on King Kong back in the 1920s, where they carefully pose out a character's every movement frame by frame, in order. Stop motion is a medium that I can't even begin to understand how they do, let alone make it look good, you know? Having a stop motion character in gravity-defying poses, making hundreds of different faces, is done solely to make the character feel more alive. And sometimes, to help sell the realism, animators will mimic quirks that only happen in live-action films. I always chuckle when I see a lens flare in an animated movie, because, like, where did you come from? There's not even a camera lens. Unlike me, though, who's always got a camera rolling. Hey, how's it going? Uh-oh. Oh, no! Did you catch that? Did you see the motion?
The motion blur.
Eating a bug. Oh, we got him. Now let's rewind the clip and pause right here. This lizard moves so fast that the camera can't even capture its movements correctly, and he transmogrifies into an amorphic blob that barely even resembles a lizard. But do not fret, dear viewer. This is called motion blur, and it's absolutely natural. Fast-moving objects are hard to see in real life anyway.
Gotta go fast.
So this blurry blob only showing up for one frame actually helps sell the idea that this little guy is moving quickly. If you watch any movie frame by frame, you'll find motion blur everywhere, and you won't even notice. So how do animators who are taking hundreds of still photos handle this naturally occurring phenomenon with things in motion? Easy, they'll draw smear.
Smear
Animators
frames.
draw their own blurry blob frame to mimic fast movements. Bodies can stretch, arms can multiply. Basically, we can sneak in nightmares as long as it's only shown for one frame. Smears, while being very fun to draw, can look very weird and goofy on their own. But in the
Yes.
context of the whole shot, you barely even notice they're there. Okay, maybe now you'll notice them, but that's only because I pointed them out. And since animators are bad boys and don't play by the rules, they can make smears out of anything. Even in stop motion, we can sculpt a physical smear frame like how they did in Leica's Paranorman, which, if you haven't seen, is going to be your new favorite movie. Smear frames can be used anytime, anywhere. Unless you were an animator in the 1920s and 30s and you didn't know about them back then. In that case, you would have been animating something called rubber.
Yep, good old rubber
That
hose.
was the one that I don't like. I do not enjoy rubber hose.
What?
I just hate that style.
Come on.
I love stop motion though.
Yeah, I know.
It's so cool. It's so fucking cool.
20s and 30s, animators were still figuring out some core principles of animation. Turns out there's 12 of them. Smear frames were used sparingly during this time, with animators usually only drawing characters with multiple limbs to show fast movements. The stretchy, wacky, and spiritually ascending smears that you all know and love weren't really used until the 1940s. Rubber hose characters have noodly, almost hose-like limbs that bend in all sorts of anatomically defying ways. Look at Mickey Mouse's noodle arms that I can now legally show you. The reason characters
Or as everybody decided to say on our reaction to Mousetrap, that's Steamboat Willie, not Mickey Mouse. It's not the same.
look like this
why
is
he's
because
OG,
drawing noodle
Mickey.
arms and not worrying about anatomy is easier to draw. But like, just because something has noodle arms doesn't mean it's bad, you guys. What these animators were able to accomplish with the technology, if you could even call it that, is
Technology?
nothing short of dark magic. And the very same studio that made Steamboat Willie wanted to push the envelope and show the world that animation could be more. It doesn't just have to be noodly characters with Pac-Man eyes. They were going to animate a realistic woman with proportional arms that don't move in weird, exaggerated ways. And oh god, her noodle arms are moving in weird, exaggerated ways. In 1934, Disney released a short called The Goddess of Spring, being their first attempt at animating a character with what was supposed to have real human anatomy. They still had a lot to learn, obviously. Now, animating a quote-unquote anatomically correct human is actually a much harder task than you might realize, and that's because of the uncanny valley. As characters get more and more human characteristics, we
That
hit
was
an interesting
horrifying.
point right here when something looks almost like a human, but is just a little off. Our pattern recognition brains start setting off alarm bells and go, ugh, something is definitely wrong with that almost human.
Right.
I'm entering fight or flight right now. So if you're trying to make something look as close to a human as possible, but are just a tiny bit off, everything crumbles. The Goddess of Spring was still good practice for Disney because only 3 years later, they released the world's first fully animated feature film, Snow White. Can you really blame Disney for going 6 times over budget to make this movie? I mean, just look at how these human characters are moving. 10 years before Snow White, animated humans looked like this. So going from this to this?
To that, right.
In only 10 years? How? I can't get over how real
Black
these
magic.
human characters look sometimes. Almost too real. Well, I think you're old enough to learn about the dangers of rotoscoping is the process of taking real-life footage and then manually tracing over every frame, resulting in an...
That was what I was going to talk about. That's what's so wild about all the older animation. Because I was thinking about Alice in Wonderland specifically. Because Snow White creeps me out. Where they filmed, like they literally filmed it and took pictures.
Yeah.
And then they just created the
Yeah.
animation story. And that's why so many of the older, old Disney films, like the main characters or even some of the side characters, they resemble the actors and actresses that...
They're based off of.
Yeah.
Yeah. 'Cause they
It's
are them.
really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
animation with unreal levels of realism. And I say unreal derogatorily. You're basically slapping a cartoon filter over live-action footage, but instead of simply slapping, you're spending multiple hours doing mindless and tedious drawing. Rotoscoping is not the same as filming a human actor and then later referencing that footage, like what Disney did for Sleeping Beauty or Alice in Wonderland or any movie ever because animators use references all the time. People had figured out how to rotoscope other people long before Snow White. So of course Disney, who was trying to convey real human movement, rotoscoped some shots. The problem with rotoscoping is that we start to sneak our way back to the bottom of the uncanny valley. Animated characters often do and should break the laws of physics. They can squash and stretch into weird proportions and be drawn in unique and interesting poses. And look, Snow White is still a masterpiece of a movie. The rotoscoping is fine, you barely notice it, it's good, it's a good movie, and it made Disney a lot of money. Also, how did Walt animate these shots of things reflecting in the water in 1937? What, did they put special glass over paintings to make it look distorted or something? Who would be crazy enough to do that? If you made a whole movie entirely rotoscoped, what you end up with is Ralph Bakshi's The Lord of the Rings. Notice anything off about these characters' movements? Look at how Gandalf moved just a year ago in The Hobbit. Now, Lord of the Rings, Hobbit, Lord of the Rings. Almost every shot in this movie was rotoscoped, and the shots that weren't used live-action footage with a filter over it. I'm not saying that rotoscoping is bad. You just have to use it correctly. A character switching from traditionally animated to rotoscoped is incredibly funny, and always will be. The YouTuber Joel Javier makes very entertaining rotoscope skits that feel like a fever dream, and I mean that underogatorily. And a lot of music videos get away with rotoscoping because, admittedly, rotoscoping is a very cool visual. Now, I wish I could say the first Lord of the Rings movie was a hidden animation gem, but I don't know, it's not on my top 10, I'm sorry. It probably made a lot of nerds in the 70s happy, but thankfully The Lord of the Rings has been adapted into many other forms of media, like video games, Magic the Gathering cards, and anime. Anime? They're making a Lord of the Rings anime? They're making a Lord of the Rings anime. You thought Hollywood, California was the only place in the world making moving pictures? Japan's been making their own moving pictures too, and some of them are moving drawings. There are entire college courses on the history of anime, but you're not paying me tuition, so we're gonna have to skip over a couple things. A lot of early anime is now lost media because cinemas didn't preserve film back then, and an earthquake destroyed many studios in 1923. Some Japanese animators created shorts out of paper cutouts because buying thousands of celluloid sheets was too expensive, and they had some very unique character designs. And some Japanese animators took inspiration from Disney and made shorts that looked very similar to America's rubber hose characters. Then by the 1940s, some major world events happened that got most of the world involved, and both American and Japanese animation studios were affected. But after all that, in 1948, one studio called Japan Animated Films, later bought out by Toei Animation, set out to be the Disney of the East, and they made cartoons about magical schoolgirls, and are still in business to this day and made some other less popular shows. One animator who quit working at Toei created his own company and made an anime based off his comic about a robot
Astro Boy!
Hey, I kinda like that art style of drawing humans with big expressive eyes. Let's do more of that. That same year, another studio made an anime about humans controlling giant robots. I wonder if that's going to inspire a whole...
Oh, this is serious business. It's Kimba.
Yeah.
You see? Did you see Kimba?
Yeah.
Pretty sure that's Kimba. I haven't seen Kimba in forever. I gotta look. Hold on. We were just talking about that the other day because it drove my parents mad. Kimba. It is! I love that movie.
Eyes. Let's do more of that. That same year, another studio made an anime about humans controlling giant robots. I wonder if that's going to inspire a whole new genre. And this guy was commissioned by American studios to make stop-motion Christmas movies like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Meaning Rudolph is anime. Naughty. By the 1960s, Japanese shows started airing on televisions all across the globe, and they continued to make unique and interesting stories with amazing animations that were beloved by billions of people and grew into extremely profitable franchises. Like, I'm talking the most profitable franchise.
Yeah.
By the 1970s, Disney was still very much the animated movie gold standard, making big budgeted movies with family-friendly values, which is fine to do. Kids love bright colors and talking animals that only cartoons can offer. But some studios realized that animation was a medium, not a genre, and made animated movies exclusively for adults. That's part of the reason why the first Lord of the Rings movie was entirely rotoscoped. It wasn't trying to be cartoony and over the top. It was trying to be real and gritty. Animation could be anything for anyone of any age.
Yeah.
But really, if you think about it, there hadn't been a new way of showing people moving drawings since those very early days of black and white stop motion. In stop motion, you take a picture, move a figure, take a picture, move a figure. In cell animation, you take a picture, move a cell, take a picture, move a cell. Everything's just been a series of pictures moved manually in front of a camera this whole time?
Always has been.
Always has been.
I knew that was coming.
You've got mail.
Oh. It says the entire animation and film industry is about to be flipped onto its head forever and ever. Yeah, right. I'm sure this whole computer thing is just a fake.
Computers and animation.
Advancements of technology, we were able
Lord,
to
where
achieve
we are now.
increasingly advanced achievements, like putting a guy on the moon and drawing silly little cartoons more efficiently. Gone are the days of having to physically draw everything out on paper and underpay a team of hundreds of pretty girls to hand paint every frame. Now we can use this fancy new computer to render everything out for us. All we have to do is create a real-life mold of our real-life human hand, then draw 350 triangles onto that hand, then manually measure out the X, Y, and Z coordinates of 800 different data points. No, come on, this is gonna be so much faster. Put that pencil down. Now we just program in a couple of keyframes and we get...
We get hand.
We still don't have the processing power to render everything out. Oh, I
This
know.
was my
we'll
trauma
just
at
point
school.
this long exposure camera at the computer screen. Get these art supplies out of here. This is the future. And when everything's finished rendering, we'll get this. A whole human hand moving on its own without having to draw a single frame. This process is exactly what Utah University student Ed Catmull did in 1972. And while it might not have been more efficient than drawing everything out by hand, it showed that computers were capable of rendering out three-dimensional animations. This was made after we landed a man on the moon, by the way, so don't tell me this was CGI. As the computer's processing power grew exponentially, more and more filmmakers started seeing the benefits of using computer-generated images in movies. A decade after Catmull digitized his hand, films like Tron showcased characters racing on mind-boggling computer-generated light cycles. This might look, you know, bad by today's standards, but these graphics were something that audiences had never seen before. Plus, the movie takes place inside of a computer, so this is probably what people thought the insides of a computer looked like anyways. At the time, computers did a great job at creating rigid geometric shapes, and animators used that to their advantage. Characters would still have to be animated traditionally on cells, but objects that weren't going to change shape, like black cauldrons, could now magically fly in circles around our characters. Disney really showed off the computer's rendering power during the climax of The Great Mouse Detective, when these two rodents fought each other inside a clock tower and all the spinning gears were generated by a computer. Animators can now make any complex shape move in a three-dimensional space without having to draw a single frame. I mean, you know, except for the characters, they still very much had to draw those. Computer graphics were here to stay as Disney integrated more of them into movies like these cars in Oliver and Company or Eric's ship in The Little Mermaid, and then they stopped using cells entirely. Starting with The Rescuers Down Under, Disney no longer used cells and made movies entirely digitally with a program called CAPS. So if you ever wanted to own a cell of Joanna the Lizard eating an egg, that's too bad because they don't exist. Which sucks because Joanna was the best lizard Disney ever made. Don't touch me! TV shows and anime still use cells till about
Calm
the year
down.
2000-ish, but eventually everyone switched to digital. Now to color a frame, all you had to do was... So computers were great at making rigid, non-flexible shapes, but has anyone ever tried to make a computer...
Computer-generated
Computer
characters.
Scientists who are working for a small indie director named George Lucas were taking this art form to an extreme level and created whole characters completely generated by a computer. Then a small entrepreneur named Steve Jobs hired those computer scientists and made his own company, Pixar. Yes, Steve Jobs
I didn't
was
know
one of
that.
the founders of Pixar.
I really
and he
didn't know that.
originally
That's
created
cool.
the company to sell a
Wow.
high-end computer powerful enough to render 3D animations. But no one bought
Damn.
the computer because it cost $135,000.
Yeah, well,
so the
how
team
about that?
scrapped the computer selling idea and just stuck with making computer-generated cartoons. But they soon discovered a unique problem. The computer had a hard time getting textures right, and everything, including babies, ended up looking like it was made out of plastic. So the team's clever work around this dilemma was to make a movie with the entire cast of characters actually made out of plastic. Or ants. You know, people don't know what ants are supposed to look like. It's fine. Pixar continued to develop new processes to get the computer to generate unique textures and lighting, like simulating human hair or fur, or lighting things in such a way to make everything appear underwater. No other studio was pioneering computer-generated images like Pixar was. And then in 2006, Disney bought Pixar. But I don't
Mine.
think Steve was too upset because 1 year later, he achieved his dream of selling a high-end computer. This time being a little more affordable. A little. Now,
little.
I want to squash any misconception that computers do all the animating. Animators still have to manually pose a character's body and facial expression off of a character's rig. Animators will build a complex system of nodes and bones that let them
character
manually
rig.
pose a character into any position possible. It's kind of like a digital stop-motion puppet, or an actual puppet without any of the strings. All CG characters are just their own complicated version of Pinocchio. Using character rigs is really the only way of animating things in 3 dimensions. But it's not like we can use rigs in 2D animation. Here in the second dimension, we don't have a fancy Z-axis. 2D animation can only be done by hand drawing 24 new images every second.
Wrong.
Except we
You
don't, I
can
lied.
rig.
Even all the way back when characters were animated with paper and cells, animators wouldn't draw a whole new frame every frame. Usually they would animate pieces of a character and paint each piece on its own cell. You remember Robin, they only drew 1 body and 5 different heads. But because cells are a physical object that get harder to handle the more you have, animators could only break a character up into 2 or 3 different pieces. But now, thanks to the computer, we can break up a character into as many pieces as we'd like 4, or 5, or 173. Have you ever played around with the free and revolutionary animation software
My guy, I need you to clean this desktop. So shouts out to Fraps.
Damn. And he still has Skype.
And GIMP, the picture editing program.
Oh, this is an old. It brings back memories.
Oh, but he's got Notepad++, so you know he's got money.
pivot stick figure animator? If you're the type of person that says, "Oh, I suck at drawing. I can't even draw stick figures," then you're gonna love this program. On Pivot, you're given a pre-made stick figure or horse that have these joints that can be posed however you like. Each of these stick figures' limbs are just individual pieces that are connected in such a way that make it look like a stick figure. So to make these animations, we're not really drawing anything, we're just manually posing out a character like a digital puppeteer. I wasn't saying you can make a rig out of 173 pieces just to be funny, because that's how many pieces I'm made out of. That's
Wow.
right, me. Even I'm a rig. And can I tell you a secret? Most TV shows use rigs too. Of
Yeah.
course, hand-drawn traditional animation is still used to make these shows. It's not a lost art form or anything. But rigs are super useful at making still pretty high-quality levels of animation, but at a much cheaper cost. And as we all know, TV animation has to create more animation per budget. But maybe rig animation still isn't as cost-effective as you'd like. And maybe you're not a fan of the complicated puppet look and you want something that looks more human. Well, there's one more animation process we can try.
Motion
called
capture.
If we put an actor inside one of these dorky ping pong suits, a computer can pinpoint and record that actor's exact movements. Now we can take those movements, slap a cartoon character's model over it, and we get an animation that looks like...
Bless you.
Motion capture is the
Death.
rotoscoping of 3D animation. It cuts costs, but the results are too human, and we're back at the bottom of the uncanny valley. That's why the kids from the Polar Express
Oh
look
my
so
gosh.
nightmarish, because they are following the exact movements of Tom Hanks. Yes, Tom Hanks, the adult man, did some motion capture for the small, nameless hero boy from the Polar Express. There's probably a reason we haven't made a fully motion capture cartoon in over 10 years. Because it looks weird. But I mean, that didn't stop one of these movies from winning an Oscar in animation. And before you ask, no, it wasn't Monster House or Tintin. It was Mars Needs Moms, duh. Just like rotoscoping, motion capture can be used correctly.
Right.
Computer-generated characters acting side by side real human actors look decent. It's not that jarring that these creatures who exist in a live-action world are moving just like live-action people. And let's not forget all the VTubers who use motion capture technology to bring their jiggly assets to life. No matter what method someone uses to try and convince you that something else is alive, I think is incredibly cool. And I hope you think it's cool too. But maybe you don't think it's cool, and you don't care about animation, and you just put this video on in the background while you were cleaning. That's totally fine, I do that all the time. I just like learning about how all of my favorite animated pieces of media get created, because it's not always the same process. And I think it's great that new technology is allowing anyone to express themselves in whatever way possible. A person expressing themselves. Those are the 3 key words here. From the big studios that are just now pioneering new and interesting styles with digital animation, to the indie studios that have access to incredible technology,
shout out to the
which
Amazing
allow
Digital
anyone
Circus
working from their
and the Legend
bedrooms
of
in their
Pippi.
pajamas to create some truly masterpieces of animation. So, if you're the type of person that likes to trick people into thinking that something is alive, then you deserve all the respect in the world. In fact, here are some cool people that made the animation in this video possible.
Oh, well, hell yeah.
Hello, you just made...
Okay, does James really have a VTuber model? Is that real? I'm concerned. Anyway, shouts out to the whole team. And
This was a
involved
really
right here.
cool video.
I do like when James talks about animation history and techniques and stuff like that. Because it is funny with how many YouTube animators that we watch and react to and how many of them are classically trained at like school for stuff like that, how they never talk about any of it.
Yeah.
And so it's just like, it's just cool that there is somebody out there that does a lot. I'm not going to say like they don't ever talk about it, but James has a lot of educational videos about animation and the history of this stuff.
Yeah.
And
So
it's just
really,
nice to
really
have
cool.
that out there for people who are interested in it that might want to learn about it that don't or can't afford to go to fucking art school because it's fucking expensive.
Yeah.
And especially with so many of them, like Didas just talked about, I think this year that he finally paid off all of his way from going to art school, and I'm like, that's just crazy, man.
Because I think that's like my big goal. That's kind of how I felt where we live locally too, because we have so many kids that enjoy art, and
yeah,
you can't afford it. I mean,
most people can't. Yeah.
in general, and so it's like that's where it's like I wanna do that too. I wanna do little drawing bits with people.
Yeah.
Because it's so cool, and it's so vast. Like
Yeah.
the mechanical side of making the magic happen is so complex, but so unique and worth learning, even though I'm not good at it.
Right.
It is very worth the learning process, but it's just rigging is so cool. I wish I was better at that. Like, I can do a simple thing. I can do a noodle. but rigging other stuff is really, really hard. And especially if you have a busted model. Because that was the other thing. Like, he was kind of talking about, but not fully, because there's just so much involved in it. But, like, when you get to the 3D aspect of things, like, you think, oh, I just have this object that I can rig, and it works.
Right.
And that's not the case, because, like, you have to make sure the model is, like, modeled perfectly so that the polygons and everything are accurate shapes. Like, and I don't really know how to make that make sense, but it has to be mapped out perfectly so that when you put the skeletal rigging on it, everything moves as it should, or it just gets very fucking janky, and then texturing it doesn't work because the model map isn't right.
Yeah.
So it's so cool, but it is so hard. But That was fun to watch.
Yeah.
Fucking Kimba. He did the Kimba.
Shouts out to James for the Kimbo reference. Y'all be sure to let us know what you thought down below and if you learned something new. And we will see you for the next video.
We should watch that movie.
Bye.